Okay, today we're going to talk about the circulatory system. And last few days we talked about the respiratory system. And as a reminder, respiration means breathing, essentially, inhaling, exhaling, inhalation, exhalation. And the whole point of this process is to bring in oxygen so that you can oxygenate all the cells in your body, because without oxygen, your cells cannot undergo cellular respiration. And without cellular respiration, you can't make ATP. And if you can't make ATP, you can't continue on with all the other cellular functions that you need to do, and so you die. All right, so oxygen is a necessity. Now the problem is, we breathe it in, we go through the respiratory tract, as we talked about the last 2 days, and we stay in the lungs. Well, if it doesn't leave the lungs, it still doesn't do the body much good, because you have cells all over your body, away from your lungs, into the tips of your toes, that also need oxygen. And so just hanging out in the lungs isn't good enough. So as we talked about the anatomy of the lungs, you had those alveoli as those tiny little nodules or branches off of the lungs that are surrounded by capillaries. And those capillaries are our bridge. Tiny, tiny blood vessels that allow oxygen to diffuse from an area of high concentration or surrounding the lungs to an area of low concentration as we enter the blood vessels. And that's when oxygen becomes a part of the circulatory system. Now, obviously this is a cycle, and it's continual all the time, every day, from the moment basically that you were conceived in some fashion. You didn't have developing lungs initially, but in some way, shape, or form, this was always happening, because you always needed your cells to be able to do their functions so that they could go on and multiply and divide, even when you were in your, before you were born, when you were in utero, you still had to be able to do these functions. So how does this all work for us? So let's talk about the structure of the circulatory system. Blood is our main transporter. Okay, blood has to transport the oxygen away from the lungs up into the heart, which we will talk about, and then that heart pumps that oxygenated blood throughout the rest of your body. Okay, but blood also has to make its way back, because we're not always making new blood, so that and the oxygen has to be dispersed throughout your body. But then guess what you're making? Once your cells receive that oxygen and they're doing their cellular respiration, they're making carbon dioxide. We don't want a body full of carbon dioxide, so your blood also works to get rid of that. That's one of the waste products that the blood also does, works with us to get rid of. So blood transports oxygen and nutrients and hormones and removes waste products like carbon dioxide from our bodies. And the heart is obviously a very important structure of the circulatory system, because without the heart, we don't have the machine or the pump to get the blood oxygenated to where it needs to go. Okay. Oh, and by the way, just a sidebar, most adults have approximately 5 liters of blood in your body. So at any given moment, you have about 5 liters of blood within your body. And then the other components are your arteries and your veins. So the way I would use to, before I just remembered it, a trick here. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, and then veins carry blood back toward the central part of the body, the veins and the lungs. The heart and the lungs. So the veins bring it back, arteries carry it away. And you also have capillaries that connect the arteries and the veins, because if arteries are having blood flowing away, you somehow have to get that blood going back up so it can get reoxygenated. Because as the oxygen flows through your body, it transfers that oxygen to the cells, and then the blood doesn't have oxygen anymore. So it has to go back and get some more. So that's why you have arteries that carry the oxygenated blood away, veins that carry the deoxygenated blood back so that they can pick up more oxygen, and so those cells can do the same thing over again. It's very important to understand too that you don't want blood flowing the wrong way. You want oxygenated blood flowing one way, you want deoxygenated blood flowing another. So your veins are equipped with valves. And what those valves do is it basically serves as they serve as one-way doors, and blood can only go in one direction. So that keeps deoxygenated blood from going backwards and backwards into the capillaries and getting back into the arteries, because you don't want your arteries to contain deoxygenated blood. Otherwise, they'd be delivering deoxygenated blood to cells instead of oxygenated blood. And that does not do your body any good. So those valves are basically, remember, they're one-way doors that keep deoxygenated blood away from the arteries and into for the rest of your body. And then you have those capillary units that connect arteries and veins. So there are the three types of vessels. And just as we have to talk about blood a little bit more, because that's the oxygen transporter and the waste transporter to get out of your body. So blood is 90%, plasma is 90% water, and very similar to lymph that we talked about when we talked about the immune system. Plasma is a yellow fluid, and that's the highest percentage as far as what makes up your blood. Plasma is the highest percentage component of your blood. And again, it's 90% water, and it's 55% of your total blood volume. Now, I have been using the term red blood cells, and you have probably heard that term. It's a bit of a misnomer. And the reason it's a misnomer is because red blood cells aren't really cells at all. They don't have a nucleus, okay? And they really don't have many cellular structures. They also don't undergo mitosis. So they don't behave like cells do. So it's just been kind of one of those things where it's picked at the vernacular has just happened because we talk about white blood cells, which really are cells, and those also make up your blood, but not as much. And then you have your red blood cells. It's just kind of a name to help keep it straight, essentially. Red blood cells versus white blood cells. But red blood cells are, again, they're not really cells. Now, the real name for them is erythrocytes. And what they really are disc-shaped molecules. And they have kind of a concave surface. And that concave surface is where hemoglobin hangs out. Now, hemoglobin is a protein that allows oxygen to bind to it. So you have to have hemoglobin on your red blood cells in order to carry the oxygen. Okay, so you have the plasma, which makes up the highest percentage per volume-wise of your blood. And that's 55% of your total blood volume. So thinking of I just said that a typical human adult has about 5 liters of blood. So 55% of that is plasma. 45% is erythrocytes or red blood cells. All right. The remainder, so 55 plus 45, check my math there. You are so close to 100%, but not quite 100% because the remainder, which is a very thin layer if you let blood separate out in a test tube. And there's a pretty good picture of that in your textbook on page 435. And as a matter of fact, if you don't have your textbook right now, I want you to pause the video and go grab it and turn to page 435. So pause the video, go get page 435, and then I want you to look at it. And you'll see a picture of this blood sample in this test tube on page 435. And you can see that you have plasma and you have your erythrocytes, and then this tiny little thin line right in the middle, that's the volume of your leukocytes. Now your leukocytes are really cells, those are your white blood cells. So for every 1 white blood cell in your body, you have about 600 erythrocytes. Okay, so you can see the difference there. And then you also have platelets within your blood. platelets are what allows your blood to clot. So when you cut yourself, you fall down, skin your knee, whatever, you don't bleed to death. And that's because you have platelets, which allow clumping together of your blood clotting, which is what gives you the scab. And then the scab stays there and as allows your body to heal, allows your skin to repair itself and regenerate under that scab. So it's just a layer of protection. Also keeps you from continuing to bleed and bleed and bleed. Okay, that process is called coagulation. All right. Now, the heart is the engine of the circulatory system. It is a huge muscle. Well, huge. It is a, no, let me take that back. It's just this size. It is an extremely powerful muscle. And obviously, very important to our survival. You have several things in the anatomy that we're going to talk about, and then I'll just show you a quick clip of how this actually works. So I'm not going to go into all of the anatomy process yet. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through the major components of the heart that I want you to be familiar with. Then tomorrow we'll look in more detail about the actual anatomy and what it's really made up of, what these things really are. But you have myocardium, and then also I'm going to show you this picture. It's in your textbook as well, and we'll go through this in more detail tomorrow. But you have this thick myocardium, and then you have the septum, and then you have atria and ventricles. These are very special chambers of your heart. And then you have the interior and superior vena cava, and then you have important veins and arteries leading to and from your heart, like the aorta, pulmonary. Pulmonary means lungs, so you can imagine what that might connect to. And then you have certain valves that we're going to be familiar with, and then you're going to look at the cardiac cycle, which is what we're going to talk about in terms of what actually happens during a heartbeat. So you have a contraction, and once in a cycle, you have a contraction and a relaxation. So boom, boom. That's one cycle where you have a contraction and a relaxation. So that boom, 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 boom. That's one cycle. Every time you hear that, and that's a contraction and a relaxation of your heart. All right, I will stop here today. We'll go into more detail about the actual pumping of the heart and the structures and what their purposes are tomorrow. Okay, hang in there, guys. We are almost done. You are in the home stretch of school and of distance learning, and I pray we never have to do it like this again. All right, you guys have a great day. I'll see you soon.